Together, let us kindle a flame symbolizing our co-creation of sacred space at home and in this place made sacred by years of love. If you are with us on Zoom, please write in the chat that a chalice is lit on your street. And please say the words with me from the pew cards or on the slide. We are a welcoming people of diverse beliefs who commit to nourish the spirit, broaden the mind, nurture the earth, and build community. May this flame we kindle remind us to strive today and every day to love beyond belief.
I can only imagine that humans of all genders have been celebrating the divine feminine, the creative power of reproduction, and the sacrifices involved in parenthood for as long as they've been alive. Ancient pagans celebrated fertility and the return of life in the spring with the festival of Beltane or May Day. Ancient Greeks and Romans' similar spring celebrations took the form of festivals celebrating a variety of goddess figures. Early Christians celebrated a Mother's Day of sorts during the festival on the fourth Sunday of Lent in honor of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ. But Mother's Day, as celebrated in the United States, has two origin stories, both connected to the Civil War. In the years before the Civil War, Anne Reeves Jarvis of West Virginia, a young mother who lost 7 of her 11 children to diseases, saw the power of women working together to solve the problems in their communities. Seeing that others around her did not have access to medical care or sanitation, she founded what she called Mother's Day Work Clubs, not Mother's Day, but Mother's Day Work Clubs, to do the things that were needed to be done. Under the guidance of doctors, the women in these clubs distributed medicine, inspected children's milk for signs of spoilage, and provided nursing care, especially to families with sick mothers. When the Civil War threatened to break up this group, Jarvis was explicit that the Mother's Day Work Clubs existed to serve all, that the goal of friendship and goodwill among women would not be disturbed by war. When diseases broke out in the soldiers' camps, the clubs provided medicine and nursing care to both sides. West Virginia was a part of the country that was particularly divided by the Civil War. After the war ended, Jarvis organized Mother's Friendship Day, calling on people's love for their mothers as inspiration to mend families and heal the rifts that war had caused. Another precursor to Mother's Day came from the abolitionist and suffragette Julia Ward Howe, whose words we heard a moment ago. During the Civil War, as historian Heather Cox Richardson wrote on her blog Letters from an American yesterday, women had bought bonds, paid taxes, raised money for the war effort, managed farms, harvested fields, worked in war industries, reared children, and nursed soldiers. When the war ended, they had every expectation that they would continue to be considered valuable participants in national affairs and had every intention of continuing to take part in them. But the 14th Amendment, which established that Black men were citizens, did not explicitly include women in that right. Worse, it introduced the word male into the Constitution when it warned states against preventing male inhabitants from voting. In 1869, the year after the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution, women organized 2 organizations, the National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association, and there's a long history about rivalry between them, but that's not our topic today. So these 2 organizations came into being to promote women's rights to have a say in American government. From her home in Boston, Julia Ward Howe was a key figure in the American Woman Suffrage Association. She was an enormously talented writer who in the early years of the Civil War had penned the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a hymn whose lyrics made it a point to note that Christ was born of woman. Howe was drawn to women's rights because the laws of her time meant that her children belonged to her abusive husband. If she broke free of him, she would lose any right to see her children, a fact that he threw at her whenever she threatened to leave him. She was not at first a radical in the mold of reformer Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who believed that women had a human right to equality with men. Rather, Howe believed strongly that women, as mothers, had a special role to perform in the world. For Howe, the Civil War had been traumatic, but the fact that it led to emancipation might justify its terrible bloodshed. The outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 was another story for her. Howe wrote about her reaction to the beginning of that war in her memoir, Reminiscences 1819 to 1899. In that memoir, she said, "I was visited by a sudden feeling of the cruel and unnecessary character of the contest. It seemed to me a return to barbarism, the issue having been one which might easily have been settled without bloodshed. The question forced itself upon me, why do not the mothers of mankind interfere in these matters to prevent the waste of that human life of which they alone know and bear the cost?" Howe had a new vision, she said, of the august dignity of motherhood and its terrible responsibilities. Out of those reactions, Howe wrote what she called an appeal to womanhood throughout the world, which is now known more commonly as the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was our reading this morning. Men always had and always would decide questions by resorting to mutual murder, she wrote, but women did not have to accept what she called proceedings which fill the globe with grief and horror. Mothers, she thought, could command their sons. Now I have to pause and say, as the mother of a young adult son, I don't actually think this is practical, but she felt strongly that mothers could command their sons, who in her words owe their life to her suffering, to stop the madness. As Linda commented to me earlier today, it hasn't worked so far. Richardson continues the story. Howe had her document translated into French, Spanish, Italian, German, and Swedish, and distributed as widely as her extensive contacts made possible. She believed that her women's peace movement would be the next great development in human history, ending war just as the anti-slavery movement had ended human bondage. She called for a festival which should be observed as Mother's Day, mothers the plural with the apostrophe after the S, and which should be devoted to the advocacy of peace doctrines, to be held around the world on June 2nd of every year. And I think we can recognize that that did not come to be. She did go on to organize international peace conferences. She threw herself into the struggle for women's suffrage, understanding that in order to create a more just and peaceful society, women must take up their rightful place as equal participants in American politics. As Richardson put it, the sheer enormity of the death caused by the Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War convinced writer and reformer Julia Ward Howe that women must take control of politics from the men who had permitted such carnage. Mother's Day was not designed to encourage people to be nice to their mothers. It was part of women's effort to gain power to change society. The official Mother's Day holiday that we know now and that we celebrate today arose in the 1900s as a result of the efforts of Anna Jarvis, daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis, who we heard about a little bit ago. Following her mother's death in 1905, Anna Jarvis conceived of Mother's Day as a way of honoring the sacrifices that mothers made for their children. In May 1908, she organized the first official Mother's Day celebration at a Methodist church in Grafton, West Virginia. Following the success of her first Mother's Day, Jarvis, who remained unmarried and childless her whole life, resolved to see her holiday added to the national calendar. Arguing that American holidays as they existed then were biased toward male achievements, she started a massive letter-writing campaign to newspapers and prominent politicians urging the adoption of a special day honoring motherhood. By 1912, many states, towns, and churches had adopted Mother's Day as an annual holiday, and Jarvis had established the Mother's Day International Association to help promote her cause. Her persistence paid off in 1914 when President Woodrow Wilson signed a measure officially establishing the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day. Anna Jarvis had originally conceived of Mother's Day as a day of personal celebration between mothers and their families. Her version of the day involved wearing a white carnation as a badge and visiting one's mother or attending church services. But once Mother's Day became a national holiday, it was not long before florists, card companies, and other merchants capitalized on its popularity. While Jarvis had initially worked with the floral industry to help raise Mother's Day's profile, by 1920 she had become disgusted with how the holiday had been commercialized. She outwardly denounced the transformation and urged people to stop buying Mother's Day flowers, cards, and candies. Jarvis eventually resorted to an open campaign against Mother's Day profiteers, as she called them, speaking out against confectioners, florists, and even some charities. She also launched countless lawsuits against groups that had used the name Mother's Day, eventually spending most of her personal wealth on legal fees. By the time of her death in 1948, Jarvis had disowned the holiday altogether and even actively lobbied the government to see it removed from the American calendar. I think from this we can gather that Jarvis would ultimately have preferred the version of Mother's Day that Julia Ward Howe had advocated for, but that is not what we as a nation chose. Mother's Day looks very different in the United States today than any of its originators imagined it might. And as I've mentioned in the prayer, it can be a complex holiday for many of us for a whole host of reasons. On this day, we might be mourning the children we have lost or ones we never had. We may not even speak to our own mothers by choice or because they are no longer with us. Even those of us who are lucky to have close relationships with our mothers or mother figures in our lives may resent the implication that what mothers want is flowers and jewelry. We may struggle to find the appropriate words on a card. If we are in the thick of caring for small children ourselves, we may cherish the sweet crafts and the extra kisses, but wonder why our countless days of heartbreaking love and exhaustion are only recognized one day a year. It's complicated in these and so many other ways, and we might be feeling many things all at once about Mother's Day, even right at this moment. It might be worth returning to the roots of Mother's Day in that mixture of celebrating divine creative power, regardless of gender, and inspiring collective social action. At times, Mother's Day has been a date for launching political or feminist causes. On Mother's Day 1968, just over a month after the assassination of her husband, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King led a march with thousands of women in Washington, D.C. as a part of the kickoff of the Poor People's Campaign, which continues today. The next year, she also participated in a march on Mother's Day in support of striking hospital workers in Charleston, South Carolina. In the 1970s, women's groups used the holiday as a time to highlight the need for equal rights and for access to child care. A more recent connection between Mother's Day and social justice efforts is called the Black Mamas Bailout, which began in 2017. It's an organized campaign to raise funds to bail out Black mamas and other Black caregivers, recognizing that nearly 2/3 of incarcerated women are Black, and that 60% of the people in local women's jails, which can include non-binary people, are not convicted, but are instead simply awaiting trial, and 80% of them are parents. Since 2017, this grassroots effort has reunited over 700 Black mamas and caregivers with their families, and over 60 cities have participated so far. As I noted earlier, and as these stories show, Mother's Day is a complex holiday. Whatever your gender, whatever your own parenting status, whatever your own experience of being parented, know that you are held and nurtured by this congregation, which offers you love and welcome exactly as you are. May it be so.
Thank you, that was lovely. As Reverend Diana extinguishes the sanctuary chalice, please extinguish your chalice at home and say the words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.